Hey everybody, it's Aiden here once again with another Storytime episode. Now after the story of Smokey Unique, whom I'm sure nobody on our side of the Atlantic had heard of, we're going to a track that every sim racer should have driven at least once over the years. The track is Brands Hatch, and it was the setting of the 1986 British Grand Prix. At the time, the British Grand Prix was alternated between Brands Hatch and Silverstone. In 1986, however, FISA policy meant tracks were to be signed up on long-term deals. Silverstone would see the British Grand Prix for the next 5 years at least. It didn't stop the track's owners. The Royal Automobile Club tried to get it back once that 5-year deal was up, as well as trying to get another British track on board for a European Grand Prix, Donington Park, although that would not happen until 1993. The Formula 1 cars of 1986 are regarded as being the most insane ever created. Even today, Formula 1 engines have no cap on engine power, and some engines, particularly the BMW M12 1.5 litre straight 4 used by the Benetton, Brabham and Arrows teams, could produce somewhere in the region of 1,350 horsepower at 5.5 bar boost, which is equivalent to around 79.7 psi. Put it this way, 1 bar is Earth's atmospheric pressure at sea level. If you live on Daytona Beach, South Lincolnshire or the Netherlands for example, that is 1 bar or 14.5 pounds per square inch. While turbocharging was new to cars, it had been happening on aeroplanes since the Second World War, particularly on heavy bombers such as the Lancaster and fighters like the Spitfire, as forced injection works better in high altitude areas such as Denver and Bolivia. So you need the air for the suck, squeeze, bang, blow that happens in an internal combustion engine, and it's easier to do that way. Propellers have to work harder at high altitudes as the air is thinner. Don't get me started on jet turbines though, that's a whole nother kettle of fish. So when we refer to bars of boost, we are effectively talking about 1 bar plus 1 bar of boost. So an engine running at 1 bar of boost is working twice as hard as it would normally. If an engine produces 100 horsepower, for example naturally aspirated, at 1 bar of boost it will produce around 200 horsepower. For every bar of boost you add, you are shoving another atmospheric pressure at sea level through the engine, and I should say that this is only a theoretical amount of power increase, as you need to take into account fuel flow, the actual air pressure, temperature, and so on. It's all very complicated. So, going back to our qualifying trim figures, the air being forced through a 1.5 litre engine was atmospheric pressure at sea level times by 5.5. So the air running through that BMW engine in qualifying trim to produce that power was around 6.5 times what it would normally be. And with that, the engines were good for only 2 laps or so, because not only were the qualifying specific tyres not lasting too long, but the sheer amount of pressure was causing the engine to eat itself alive, and there was a staggering amount of engines exploding in that time. For that reason, the BMW in the Benetton, Arrows and Brabham was known as the Grenade. In response to these insane turbo pressures that have been creeping up, the FIA banned refuelling in 1984 to force the teams to turn the pressures down to make them last the entire race. At races such as Hockenheim, where the vast majority of the lap was at full throttle, drivers tended to retire with engine explosions and fuel levels incompatible with racing. It must be pointed out that in 1986 fuel quantity was restricted to 195 litres a race, down from the 220 from the previous year, as cars were still going too quick. The power of the turbocharged engines was so great that it could not even be accurately measured until years later, when the technology was advanced enough. Purpose-built drivetrains had to be fitted to the chassis of each car for specific sessions. There were qualifying engines that had unrestricted boost pressure, and qualifying gearboxes designed to withstand the engine's extra power. These components would only last about 3 or 4 minutes or 2 or 3 laps during use. The drivetrain units were then taken out and replaced with the boost-restricted engines and specifically prepared gearboxes for races, because back then, you were able to spunk money at the wall just like that. When these turbocharged engines were fitted to the cars, the whole package weighed about 540 kilos or 1,190 pounds. For qualifying, the power-to-weight ratios were about 2,500 horsepower per tonne for the Benetton BMW and 1,850 horsepower per tonne for the Benetton's race trim, compared to about 1,175 horsepower per tonne for a modern F1 car. And all F1 cars had manual stick-shift gearboxes back then. A consistent problem for these new turbo engines that was somewhat smoothed over, particularly by Ford and Honda, was the turbo lag. In the engines, which were mechanically turbocharged, the power would only come on all at once 2 or 3 seconds after the driver put his foot down. It would usually measure out from about 100 to 300 horsepower for the first 2 to 3 seconds, then the engine would go immediately to the top of the power range, usually 900 to 1000 horsepower. The nature of these engines made them very difficult to drive. Drivers had to anticipate when the power would come on, so they would floor the gas pedal much earlier than usual to get the power on at the right moment. Senna, on the other hand, would feather the throttle through the corners to keep the turbo spooled up so it was all ready to go when he actually needed it. For 1987, the amount of boost was restricted to just 4 bar. 1986 was also the same year that Frank Williams, owner and founder of the Williams Grand Prix team, had the accident which left him paralysed from the neck down. At a pre-season test session at Paul Ricard in the March of 1986, Williams lost control of his rented Ford Sierra and ended up upside down in a field not far from Marseille. 4 months after the horrific accident, Sir Frank had recovered enough, if you can recover from being a paraplegic, but then again I'm not a doctor, to attend a race. No mean feat for a man still adjusting to this new life of being in a wheelchair and being totally dependent on others, while still running a multi-million pound F1 operation. Despite Sir Frank not being around, Williams was having a good 1986. Nelson Piquet had won on his debut in Brazil, but going into the British round it was Nigel Mansell who had won 3 of the previous 4 rounds and had closed it to within a point of championship leader Alain Prost. In the midst of all this, Mansell's rise had somewhat pissed off his teammate. Piquet had signed a $3.3 million contract with Williams the year before, and as the Williams and Honda partnership clicked, Mansell took a debut win at the European Grand Prix at Brands Hatch and followed it with another win in South Africa. Piquet believed he had undisputed number 1 status, and to be fair, if you'd signed a deal worth $7.5 million today's US dollars, you would think that too, considering Mansell wasn't earning anywhere near that. Piquet had this treatment at Brabham, where he won 2 championships with a Rubens Barrichello or Mark Webber type of driver as a teammate. Such teammates included Hector Rabac. Yeah, I'm not sure who that guy is either. Teammates like Rabac in the other car meant that certain people, such as Ayet and Senna, were not going to get near a World Championship winning car for as long as Piquet had access to one. So the practices that we see Schumacher and Vettel doing, Piquet effectively invented. Sir Frank's accident made all this a little difficult. Number 1 status was not in the contract and Piquet believed it was a verbal one instead, but there was no Frank around to confirm. In the meantime, Mansell was in a run of form, and that pushed Piquet to try and crush Mansell in his own backyard. Like I previously mentioned, this was the last race at Brands Hatch. Then FIA President Jean-Marie Balestri originally gave special permission for Britain to host 2 Grand Prix because, you know, we're much better at it than everybody else, but Bernie managed to slap him into line and the current policy of 1 country, 1 circuit was put in place. Although Italy has since hosted 2 Grand Prix a season, as has Spain, and Japan, and Germany. Brands is a great track, typically British in that it's fast and flowing and has largely remained untouched since it was built. The Dingle Dell chicane is not a chicane anymore and has been renamed Sheens after motorcycle champion and all-round legend Barry Sheene. Brands' main problem is lack of space and runoff, and with a housing estate not far from Stirling's and the Sheen Curve, it looks like F1 will never return unless massive renovation work takes place. The pits, for instance, would have to move, going on the straight near Pilgrim's Drop. Around 150,000 people crammed into the small Kent circuit to see the British hero Nigel Mansell, who was after Britain's first world title since James Hunt 10 years prior. While Senna had taken pole for 5 of the last 8 races, the Williams was the much superior car around the track. This was with Senna using an upgraded engine, lighter spare car and using a smaller fuel tank. To the disappointment of everyone in attendance, Piquet grabbed pole. Mansell was second while Gerhard Berger took third. The reigning champions McLaren were on the 3rd row, and this was the first race where a team, in this case McLaren, used blankets to preheat the tyres. Boom! Pub trivia. Derek Warwick put his Brabham 9th on the grid. The car was so bad around the circuit that Brabham was using the 1985 car for the race. Ricardo Betresi in the other Brabham was 15th, 4 seconds slower than Piquet had gone the previous year. The 2 Ferraris had a crap session with Alboreto 12th and Stefan Johansson in 18th. Johansson would have been higher up if not for Ferrari telling him to get out of his car so Alboreto could get higher up the grid. Johansson's position was down to not being allowed to go out after his first lap, during which he hit traffic, rather than the fact he was slow. When the lights went out, Piquet converted his pole position. Mansell made an okay getaway, but the second he put the car into 3rd, there was an explosion at the rear of the car. The diff had blown, and as the field headed through Paddock Hill, Mansell was dropping places. Behind them, Thierry Boutsen's arrows had gone out of control. The car pulled to the left under braking and he hit the tyres on the left-hand side of the track before bouncing across into the middle. Johansson swerved to avoid him but did not see the Ligier of Jacques Lafitte in his blind spot. The Ligier went across the grass and struck a barrier head-on. The race was immediately stopped. You'd expect after a major accident on the first corner of the first lap, the first doctor on the scene would have been Professor Sid Watkins. Not on this occasion, for there was a doctor taking part in the race. Jonathan Palmer, Jolyon's dad. He'd parked his Zach Speed at the side of the track and jumped out to help. Lafitte had to be cut out of the car and was taken by helicopter to Sidcup Hospital with broken legs, broken hip, broken ankles, and broken feet. It took Sid and the marshals well over an hour to get him out. With the original start void, Mansell would have been able to take the spare car for the restart. The only problem was, the car was set up for Nelson. The team managed to get Nigel's seat out of his normal car and get it into the spare, but he would still have to race in a car set up for somebody else. We're getting into a car which hasn't been set up for me and it's going to be trust to luck whether it's going to go or not. I'd rather the accident not happen and I be out the race because I believe Jacques was hurt. But no, it's going to be really difficult to race. That's my impression of Nigel there. Absolute barrel of fucking laughs. Given that the diff had blown, Mansell took it a little easier on the second time round. Only 22 cars made the restart. Lafitte was being pumped full of painkillers at an NHS hospital, Boutsen had claimed the spare arrows, leaving his teammate with no option but to sit out, and Asella had no spare car because, well, Asella. Mansell may have been a little too careful though, since Berger managed to jump him off the start. By lap 3, Nigel had managed to work out how to drive with Piquet's setup and quickly passed the Austrian to take on his teammate. Senna meanwhile had Keke Rosberg's McLaren climbing all over the back of him, but was handed some luck when the Finn's gearbox gave up on lap 8. Mansell was now chasing Piquet. Brands Hatch is a difficult track to overtake at and he just needed an opportunity. Thankfully, he got one. As Piquet came out of Stirling's Bend, Piquet missed a gear and more importantly missed out on some sweet, sweet torque. At the same time, Johansson's Ferrari was pulling to the side of the track with smoke pouring out of the Ferrari V6 Turbo, and Mansell used this as a slipstream slingshot to pass both cars. Alain Prost in the other McLaren was having issues too. The car was not balanced correctly, having lost one of his wheel balancing weights. Piquet came into the pits first. Today we'd be talking about the undercut and tyre offset deltas and all sorts of mathematical bullshit, but this was a time when preheated tyres were not a thing. Like I already said, McLaren had been the first team to do this at this very race. There was also no refuelling, and teams were not as well drilled as they are today, so Piquet was stopped for 9 seconds just to change 4 tyres. Mansell was stationary for 9.5. In fact, pit crews did not even wear fireproof overalls back then, and there was no pit lane speed limit. If you know brands, you'll know how tight the pit lane is, and at Monza, cars could be entering and leaving the pits at around 170 miles an hour. Ah, the 80s. When Mansell came back out, he had Piquet all over his tail. Nigel managed to get the overtaking move at Druid's blocked, but Piquet was able to keep glued to the rear of Red 5 for the entire lap. Dirty air in the 80s was what came out of your arse after a dodgy curry in Birmingham rather than aerodynamic hoodoo. At Paddock Hill the next lap, Piquet tried again, only to find Alessandro Nannini's Minardi on the inside line at Druids. In the commotion, Mansell had managed to get his tyres up to temperature. Lafitte's lap record fell by half distance and Piquet and Mansell continued to trade fastest laps for the remaining half of the Grand Prix. Piquet managed a 109.8 on lap 68, but every time Piquet managed to negate any advantage, Mansell had even more to give, pulling another 0.3 of a second out of nowhere on lap 69. 6 laps later, Mansell took the checkered flag and the home crowd went insane. Prost meanwhile managed to finish third. He had pitted twice to get his wheel balancing issues sorted, and although shaken by his friend's crash on the first lap, he managed to persevere where his rivals were beyond reach. Piquet and Mansell were the only 2 cars on the lead lap, and they had lapped everyone except Prost at least twice. And they say Mercedes have it too easy today. Rene Arnoux managed to give Ligier good afternoon all things considered by finishing 4th, and Derek Warwick would have been 5th, but he ran out of fuel, allowing Martin Brundle and Felipe Strife to collect the final 2 points paying positions. Donny Dumfries, real name John Crichton Stewart, 7th Marquess of Butte, was 7th. Warwick eventually finished 8th, and Dr. Palmer, who now actually owns the circuit as part of Motorsport Vision Group, finished 9th. Thierry Boutsen was 10th, but he was not classified because he had failed to complete 90% race distance. He finished, but he was not classified. That was because he'd been lapped 13 times. Ginny Williams, Frank's late wife and Claire's mother, collected the trophy on her husband's behalf. At this stage of the season, Williams had the upper hand and the rivalry between Mansell and Piquet had the opportunity to go into all-out war in Williams' absence. Although, Patrick Head was still around, and that's a guy with very little, if any, time for bullshit. Jacques Lafitte's crash prompted new safety rules from the FIA. As of 1987, the driver's feet have to be positioned behind the front axle, meaning that the crumple zone will be the nose cone rather than the driver's ankles. Lafitte spent a month in hospital recovering from his injuries, and the crash ended his F1 career. He has since raced in touring cars, but he has never returned to open-wheel racing. Mansell's season was starting to go his way. This win had put him in front of Prost at the top of the drivers' standings, and it looked like Britain was on course for our first drivers' champion since Hunt in 1976. Unfortunately, Mansell suffered a blowout in the final race at Adelaide, and it delayed his championship aspirations for another 6 years, when he would finally win the title in dominant fashion in 1992. He later went and won the kart title in 1993, becoming the first person to hold the Indy and F1 titles at the same time. Piquet had a rage quit moment after Adelaide, claiming that the contract he had signed giving him number 1 status had not been honoured, and Williams had not ordered Mansell to let him ride to claim wins. Had this been in place, Piquet would have easily won the championship instead of the 2 of them being beaten by Prost in a more uncompetitive car. Ironically, in this season, Piquet won more races than he ever did in any of his championship winning years. Piquet still stayed for 1987, where he won his 3rd title. Between Detroit and Portugal, he never finished off the podium, and at the Hungarian Grand Prix that year, he announced he was moving to Lotus as the undisputed number 1 driver, the position he claimed he had at Williams. Honda allegedly dumped Williams for McLaren at the end of 1987 despite a year remaining on the contract, as they paid most of Piquet's salary and they were allegedly angry that Williams and Patrick Head didn't allow Piquet an easier time. Piquet's career took a nosedive in 1988, where he resorted to using the media to attack his rivals. He called Mansell an uneducated blockhead, insulted Mansell's wife's looks, and called Senna the Sao Paulo taxi driver that doesn't like women. He also managed to piss off the Tifosi at Monza by saying Ferrari might do better if Enzo Ferrari wasn't so old and decrepit, although on that occasion he might have actually been right. As of February 2018, Brands Hatch has yet to host another Formula 1 Grand Prix. Silverstone has had the exclusive right since, although a one-off European Grand Prix was held at Donington Park in 1993, featuring possibly the best wet weather drive in history courtesy of Elliott and Senna. But that might be a video for another time. So this has been the full story of the 1986 British Grand Prix. Sorry if it sounds rushed. I hope you've learned something new today, and I hope to find something else to write about in time for next week. Remember to like and subscribe so you never miss a future video, and until next time, I've been Aidan Millward. Have a great day wherever you live in the world, and I'll see you all again on Friday for another video. Goodbye.